The queen who defied the gods, the dark legend of Semiramis. Witness the bloody ascent of the legendary queen who shaped the ancient world from the dust of Babylon. Semiramis, the woman who killed for love, burned the world for power, and ruled with an iron fist. Was she a divine miracle or a cursed tyrant? Step into the shadows of history and discover the truth. Watch the full story now, if you dare. The Curse of the Heavens and the Ascent written in blood. In the deepest, darkest layers of history, in an age where only whispers remain, a legend was blooming upon the scorching sands of Mesopotamia. This is the story of how one woman's ambition set the world on fire. Semiramis. Her very birth was a defiance of the laws of nature. Her mother, the fish-bodied goddess Derceto, abandoned her newborn infant on a desolate rocky shore, driven by the shame of a forbidden love with a mortal youth. But the gods would not allow this sacred blood to dry in the sand. That sun-drenched shore bore witness to a miracle. The cries of the infant echoing through the desolation were heard not by men, but by the rulers of the sky, the pigeons. Thousands of white pigeons covered the small girl with their wings, providing her warmth. They fed her with milk and cheese carried in their beaks. Semiramis was introduced to the wings of birds before the hands of humans. This mystical beginning would follow her throughout her life, both as a blessing and a curse. The shepherds who found her could never have imagined that they were looking at the future Iron Queen who would topple kingdoms and build empires. As Semiramis grew, her beauty began to eclipse all the wild nature of Mesopotamia. In her eyes lay the darkness of storms, on her skin the radiance of the desert sun. When her fame reached the palaces, Onnes, the most powerful general of the Assyrian Empire, wished to see this legendary beauty with his own eyes. Onnes was mesmerized the moment he saw her, but this was not just love, it was a surrender. When Onnes chose Semiramis as his wife, he did not know he was signing his own death warrant. Semiramis was too great to remain just a general's wife. She was determined to be the wife of the entire world. King Ninus of Assyria had besieged the city of Bactra, but stood helpless before its impenetrable walls. The army was exhausted, and the king was furious. At that moment, Semiramis arrived at the battlefield to join her husband, Onnes. Where men failed to strategize, she stepped forward like a goddess. With a brilliant military mind, she identified the weakest point of the siege and personally led the charge, scaling the fortress walls herself. When the city fell, everyone knelt before the courage of this woman. When King Ninus looked at Semiramis, he saw not just victory, but infinite power. And from that moment on, for the throne in Semiramis's heart, Onnes had to die. King Ninus offered Onnes a deal. If he gave his wife to the king, he could marry the king's daughter in return. Onnes was trapped between his passion for Semiramis and his loyalty to his king. But Semiramis was not an object in this bargain. She was the hidden architect. She used those famous gazes that drove Onnes to suicide. When Onnes took his own life in despair, Semiramis shed no tears. She knew that a crown soaked in blood was more valuable than any bright jewel. By marrying Ninus, she established herself in the heart of the Assyrian Empire, not as a queen consort, but as a ruler. The Splendor of Babylon and the Queen's Dark Secrets. The death of King Ninus, which many secret texts claim was a slow, active poison planned by Semiramis, marked the beginning of her true reign. She was no longer accountable to anyone. Her first task was to build a city that would astonish the world, Babylon. On the banks of the Euphrates River, massive brick kilns began to burn day and night.
thousands of slaves carried stones and dug canals at the queen's command. The walls of Babylon were so wide that chariots could pass side by side atop them. Semiramis designed this city as a mirror of her own magnificence. Semiramis's greatest legacy was the Hanging Gardens, the ultimate symbol of the impossible. In the heart of the desert, she built massive stone terraces rising toward the sky. These terraces were adorned with exotic trees and flowers brought from all corners of the world. River water was pumped to the highest levels using mechanical devices that were considered sorcery at the time. The waterfalls cascading from the gardens transformed the city's heat into an oasis. But beneath this beauty lay a profound darkness. The graves of thousands of workers who died during the construction were located directly under those massive pillars. The queen was not satisfied with architecture alone. She was also an unstoppable conqueror. She organized expeditions reaching as far as the depths of India. Her army was so vast that rivers ran dry and forests cleared their paths. Against the war elephants of India, she created giant monsters by dressing camels in fake skins. Her intellect was always ahead of brute force. However, with every battle won, she lost a bit more of the mercy in her heart. She was no longer a living human. She was a statue made of flesh and bone, worshipped and feared. The palace of Semiramis had become a place where lust and blood intertwined at night. To ensure loyalty, the queen would take the most handsome youths of the empire to her bed. But for these young men, dawn did not mean a reward. It meant execution. She allowed no man to hold power over her, to learn her secrets, or to demand anything from her. When the sun rose, the night's love ended with the executioner's blade. The palace corridors of Babylon were filled with the whispers of the dead who could not speak. At the peak of her power, Semiramis began to defy not only men, but also the gods. She erected temples in her own name and commanded her people to worship her as a goddess. But this hubris caused a rift within the palace. Her son, Ninus, loathed his mother's dark reign and hated vanishing in her shadow. In the secluded corners of the palace, the seeds of the great betrayal that would bring about her end began to be sown. This magnificent empire built by Semiramis had begun to rot from within. The Return of the Dove and the Eternal Legend. Years had taken away Semiramis's peace, if not her beauty. The queen now expected a dagger from every shadow and a coup from every whisper. Prophecies had foretold that her end would come at the hands of her own son. Ninus was no longer a child, but an ambitious man eyeing his mother's throne. One night, Semiramis herself learned of an assassination plot hatched in the secret rooms of the palace. However, she did not have her son executed as expected. Perhaps for the first time, that divine blood in her veins merged with a maternal instinct. Semiramis ascended to the highest tower of Babylon, the point closest to the gods. She took one last look at the massive city stretching beneath her, the hanging gardens she had built, and the lands she had watered with blood. The footsteps of her son and the soldiers echoed behind her. When Ninus burst into the tower with a gleaming dagger, he found not a queen, but a beam of light. Semiramis's body suddenly shrank, and her arms turned into snow-white wings. She did not belong to this world, and she would not leave it as a mortal. Ninus's dagger cut through the void. Only the sound of flapping wings and a single white feather floating in the air remained in the room. Semiramis soared over Babylon as a dove and vanished into the infinite blue of Mesopotamia. From that day on, the people of Babylon looked for their queen's eyes in every white pigeon in the sky. She died as the most ambitious woman in history, but her legend continued to live with every flap of a wing for thousands of years. Babylon fell, walls turned to dust, but but the name of Semiramis remained the greatest secret whispered by the wind.